Hey, what's up? It's Bon. Let's talk about Mass Effect. So today I have a video that is inspired by a video by another creator by the name of Kala Elizabeth. I will be posting a link to their video right here, and there should be one down in the description. She did a video talking about why Andromeda will be involved in the next game, and why Andromeda will continue. And I watched the video. I thought it was really well thought out and very well researched and presented. But I had kind of my own takes on a lot of the things that were presented. So I thought it would be a fun video to look at the same information and do this thing where I've noticed it a lot in the Mass Effect community where we're all looking at the same fairly small amount of information that's available about the next game and coming up with a lot of different ideas about what it means. One thing I want to be very clear about, when I was in the Division community, there was this really bad habit of creators making videos to basically like dispel other creators' videos. That's not what this is. Kala's video is very well made, very well researched, very convincing, even to myself, who may want different things. So this isn't like I'm right and they're wrong. No. The other part is that the takes that I have and that she presented are being presented by lots of people, and it seems like everyone kind of has their own idea of what they want, and we just have two more of those ideas. So I'm going to be talking about a lot of the same stuff. Definitely go check out her video and kind of get her take, and come back here and let me know what you think, what you agree with, what you disagree with. I think that'd be really great. Before we get into it, make sure to subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment just to help me out. I'm doing lots of Mass Effect videos. I've got more than 50 on the playlist right now, plenty more to come. So if you like Mass Effect, I highly suggest you come around. So, the first thing to talk about are a bunch of, or a few tweets that Mike Gamble, who's the lead producer, the head of the next Mass Effect, some tweets that he made back in 2020. That is when the initial trailer was released for confirming this next game is coming. Some of them are suggestive, some of them aren't, and I'm going to present four of them that I have saved. So this one here shows someone saying, as most people have already deduced, the trio appears to be Angaran, Drell, Solarian. So Andromeda, but who is on I think they meant left. So this is a really old piece of concept art that appears to have a Solarian, a Drell, and an Angaran, and probably a human. I believe this is maybe even Andromeda era concept art, and the response from Mike Gamble is, "Don't be so sure about anything you just wrote." This was one of my first indications of like, it's not uncommon for this concept art to use old concepts, to use things that aren't ever going to make it to the next game, to even be down roads that aren't being gone down at all. So it seems like Gamble in this instance was trying to very much be like, maybe none of that's true, don't go too deep. Concept art sometimes is just concept art. In another tweet here, we had someone say the opening shot has a very pointed imagery of two galaxies. My mind is racing. Are we going to get a single sequel to both games? The response from Gamble was intentional. If you're someone who liked Andromeda a lot and want a sequel to that game, this is obviously a very important tweet and a very exciting one. If you're someone who wants a true sequel to Mass Effect 3, like myself, this is also a very exciting tweet. And this may lead to both ideas, or everyone's ideas being respected in some capacity. I have my reservations about a dual timeline game that takes place like in both galaxies, or one that brings them together, but who knows. But this example and many others since have at least a little bit, and in most cases significantly hinted to some type of crossover, but we'll have to wait and see what that means. This one here is interesting. I hear, quote, Godspeed, and all I can think of is that moment taking off in the Tempest for the first time. This again was responded by Gamble as intentional. This is another one that is a very, very obvious shot to Andromeda. Was a part of Kala's video where, this is an obvious reference and a very deep reference to Andromeda that you can't ignore. Even if you're someone like me who is more leaning towards a true sequel to 3, his statement here, you can't ignore it. It's obvious that there's something happening there, and it's probably going to involve Andromeda in some way. We have this one here where a person points out from the trailer from 2020, Reaper, and he confirms. This is something I've talked about a few times. It's actually, if you look into the background, there's actually 2 Reapers in this part of that trailer. The character is walking on one Reaper, and then there's a dead Reaper in the background, very lightly silhouetted as well. So these tweets, they're 2 years old. They're very vague. A big thing to keep in mind, they didn't even have their narrative director at the time. They didn't hire their narrative director until 2022. So while I'm sure the old outline is pretty set in stone, that's up for change. So maybe at one point it was just a true sequel to 3, and then they decided to bring in Andromeda. Maybe it was a true sequel to Andromeda. They brought in the trilogy. Maybe it's been both all along. Maybe it's neither. We don't really know, but it's at least exciting to look. The next thing we have here is this obviously very exciting art, or this picture that we see at the beginning of the 2020 trailer that confirmed that this next game even exists. And so what's so interesting about this part of that trailer is that you really see the lines drawn of what people want from the next game and the games that they prefer of the current games when they see this. Because when I see this, and as the trailer moves past this, I see the Milky Way galaxy and the 2/3 of this screen. I see Andromeda in the background, and we see the camera dive into the Milky Way. Now, to me, that very clearly says, hey, they're very clearly indicating, yes, we know Andromeda's there, but here's the Milky Way, and here's where we're going back. Now, people have interpreted this other ways. They've interpreted this as, hey, look, both galaxies are here. They're both going to happen, or whatever. That's just my take. I feel like the symbolism of diving into the Milky Way was very clear in that trailer, but who knows? The next point is one that I think is going to be really interesting and probably a huge point in the next game, and it's this part of the trailer here. And so if that's not loud enough on the video, for you to know what it's saying is Arc 6 is away, Godspeed. So the Godspeed is what was mentioned in that tweet before that was in reference to the takeoff of the Tempest for the first time. The Arc 6 is the big mystery, right? We know from Andromeda there were 5 arcs. And so there's never been an Arc 6 discussed before. Now, I have seen people say, like, well, the Nexus was one of the arcs, so there are 6 arcs already. I don't think so. I think it's been made pretty clear that Arc 6, and I suspect for the next game, Arc 6 is going to be something new for us to explore, to learn about. And it very well may be how they try to connect Andromeda and the Milky Way in some capacity, the way they try to connect the trilogy and Andromeda. Maybe the next game is about building Arc 6 to send another mission to Andromeda to see what happened. I don't know. Maybe there's new tech they discovered on the Reaper corpses that they can send another arc to get there much faster. Maybe there's more going on than we know. But I'm pretty into the idea, and I believe Kala's video said something along the same lines of this Arc 6 appears to be a new thing. It's not one of the arcs we know about, and I think it's going to be a bridge in some capacity to the game that comes after this next game. The next one here is a discussion about this ship. So if you saw this in the 2021 and 7-day teaser poster they released, this ship that we don't have named, it just has the SFX branding on it, or the label. You've seen this interpreted all kinds of ways. And so the way I've interpreted it is that it's a throwback to the Mass Effect 1 Normandy. The shape of it doesn't look like super futuristic. It doesn't look super advanced or anything. The coloring of the white, black, and red, I think, is pretty interesting, and I'll make comparisons here shortly. And then the SFX, if you don't know, was the code name for Mass Effect 1. So to me, this is a throwback to Mass Effect 1. It's doing the color scheme of the first Normandy. It's battered. If you see, like, the paint here is chipped on it, you see scratches all over it. My crazy thoughts on this is that after the Reaper War, they're short on ships because of all the damage that was done, and this may even be like an old Alliance vessel that our crew is using for the time being because that's all that's available. Complete speculation, but something I kind of came up with. Now, in Kala's video, she talked a lot about how that coloring very much reminded her, and even the shape of the ship reminded her of the Tempest from Andromeda, which is totally true. Now, I've always thought of the Tempest as being a throwback to the Normandy 1, because in many ways Andromeda is very much a callback to Mass Effect 1, very much a game that was trying to retread those tires and kind of start anew in a new galaxy. But Andromeda has a lot of Mass Effect 1 feels, and to me, this ship in the poster, as well as the Tempest, were both references to Mass Effect 1's Normandy. Now, maybe this ship is a reference to the Tempest. Maybe it's not. I have no idea. Maybe they're all references to each other. But again, that just goes to show you how the different interpretations from what people want, from their own biases, from their own histories, from their own knowledge catalogs, can lead people down different paths to what they see. This concept art was a part of Kala's video, and is something that I've seen before as well. I think it's really interesting because I've seen people, including my own and Kala's and other people's takes on this, is she saw it as very remnant appearing. I don't disagree. I think it definitely does appear very remnant to E. It also could be Prothean E. It could be a whole new civilization. One thing I think is really interesting is that I have pretty bold predictions at this point that the next Mass Effect game is going to take us to new star systems that weren't previously explored, and that we're going to run into entirely new species that we've never seen before. And this very well could be concept art of a species we've never seen. A big part of that being that the ships that we see are a shape that we've never seen, whether it was Remnant, whether it was Ket and Garen, or any of the trilogy Milky Way species. This looks completely unique. So even if it's just a concept, they weren't trying to reference something that I think we're already familiar with, which I found really interesting. A next big part that people have been kind of talking about is these logos in a piece of art that may be Ilium. It was in the 2022 in 7-day blog, and in the background are these symbols, and these are the logos for the shops, for a couple of the shops in Andromeda. And so in the settlements where the people have set up shops, and they've established these, so you would assume that these are corporations that have these logos. Now, my thought when I saw these was, okay, that makes sense. Various corporations and companies had interest in spreading to this new project. They probably sponsored the initiative in some capacity, and they wanted their stuff to go too. And so in my brain, these are just companies that happen to have sent things to Andromeda that also exist in the Milky Way. Now, other people are interpreting this as, well, we've only seen these in the Milky or in Andromeda, so if they're in the Milky Way, say this was a Milky Way concept art, well then, there must be a bigger connection there. I don't know. I think both speculations are very valid. We don't know. And all of this stuff has been very intentionally vague to keep us from really being sure. And I think that's a lot of fun. A big one here, this has been talked about since 2020, is Liara's face. And so a part of Kala's video, as well as endless posts on Reddit and Twitter threads and all of that, is really, really, really focused on Liara's wrinkles on her eyes and on her cheeks. And so people have interpreted that as, okay, wow, Liara must be a matriarch at this point. She's aged. She looks older. She looks like her mother, Benezia. So that must mean that this game is going to take place hundreds of years later. Of course, right after this, right before this, she was looking at a shard of N7 armor. Obviously, an N7 armor piece could come from any N7. But when Liara is holding a piece of N7 armor, you know the suggestion. It's Shepard, right? Now, maybe he's been dead for hundreds of years. We have no idea. My thing is with the wrinkles. Well, there's a few things to talk about. So one thing to point out is that we meet, I think the second oldest Asari that we deal with in the games is Arya. She's someone who in Mass Effect 2 and 3 doesn't appear to have any of these aging lines and stuff like that, and she's almost as old as Benezia. I even went back and looked at some of the art of Benezia from this is from the Legendary Edition, and while she does have some really minor lines around her nose and eyes, she doesn't nearly have the same kind of thing that we're seeing here in this art of Liara from the 2020 teaser trailer. So there's a few things to consider here. Maybe this was supposed to be a really clear signal to everyone that Liara is older. This is taking place many years later. Maybe. It's also worth considering that this would have been completely CGI made from scratch. This wasn't using models from the next game or the old games. And it very well may be that it's just a high definition image of Liara. Maybe Liara was aged by the Reaper War or being the Shadow Broker or whatever. I have no idea. A lot of other things still make me think that this game isn't going to take place hundreds of years later. But, the logic to think that this is supposed to mean that it does isn't wrong. It's just, intentionally vague, just like basically everything else, I think. One last one here. It's actually something that her and I kind of went back and forth on in her comments was there's a belief a lot of people think that this figure in that 2021 poster is Ryder right here. This is probably the single best example of how probably what you want from this is what you're gonna see. Because even people showing pictures of like, oh, this is what the Andromeda helmet looks like from above and stuff like that. So I've interpreted this figure. I think this is pretty obviously a Krogan in the big red battle armor. This to me has always been pretty obviously a human or an Asari. This to me was always really, in my personal take, was obviously a Turian. Because here you see this humanoid figure, you can clearly see their front and back legs, and here you can't. And to me, so that kind of took in the idea of them having their legs kind of under them, like the Turians are kind of swept back a little bit. And I also felt like this big ring here around the head is supposed to be that ring that all of the Turian armor and clothing has that kind of goes around their neck. And again, where some people interpret this as being Ryder somehow in their own interpretation, I actually interpreted this right here, this helmet being a red striped helmet, as being an N7, a human. And so this just goes to show you that if you show the same thing to 100 different people, you'll get 100 different ideas about what the next game is going to be. Because this one blurry, intentionally blurry image that you can't really make out exactly what we're looking at here can be interpreted by different people with good intentions and their own really good ideas and explanations in completely different ways. And I actually have one bonus thing that while I was finding the images for this, I pulled up this tweet from Casey Hudson. Now, just to explain the history of this, Casey Hudson did Mass Effect. He was the creator of Mass Effect 1, 2, and 3. I can't remember the timeline exactly, but he was around for some of Andromeda, or maybe all of it, and then he left, and then he came back. And that's when he made this tweet where he shared concept art for the next Mass Effect game that they were making. This was shared on N7 Day, but this was before they confirmed the next Mass Effect with this trailer that didn't come until 2020, a year later. Now, since this, Casey Hudson has left the project again. He started his own Humanoid Studios developer, and he's making his own game. But this concept art, I've never seen any of it before somehow, and I think it's interesting. And the reason being is that this is trilogy era, 100%. You see the Alliance armor. You see a Krogan. This may even be an N7 armor, but this is obviously a Mako in the background. You see this here. This is obviously the Normandy, where we have some newer art that's like, well, maybe that's the Normandy. This is obviously but this is the SR1 to keep in mind because of the tail. So this may be old Mass Effect art, Mass Effect 1 art. Here we have this is actually kind of Cerberus looking color schemes and stuff, or at least Alliance color schemes. And then here we have the Normandy again and some art here. So when he says, there's so many stories to tell, it's a concept art that hasn't been brought to life, that to me, in my personal hopes and desires, gives me some thought that maybe, at least at that time, back in 2019, they were intending on making a true sequel to the trilogy. But who knows what's changed in 3+ years, and we probably won't know for a couple more years. So if you've listened to this whole video, thank you so much. I'm not as organized and as professional as some of the other creators that do Mass Effect stuff. But I do what I can. I'm more off the cuff, and I appreciate it if you listen to these videos. Like I said before, in the link down in the description below, go check out Kala's video. Watch both of these videos. Tell me what you think, which way you lean, or if you have your own ideas. I'd be really curious to get that from you. So make sure to subscribe to the channel. Follow me on Twitter at Bondiesel. You can check me out on Twitch. It's twitch.tv/Bondiesel, where I'm going to be streaming more in 2023. You can also listen to my weekly gaming news podcast called the EchoCast on all podcast platforms and this YouTube channel. That's all I have for this one. Until next time.